Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Christopher, and welcome to the Belle of the Broads. Now I'm going to be your skipper for today's trip, and we have Pete downstairs. He's going to be your crew, serving you and maybe chatting to some of you along the way. So very shortly I'm going to do a quick safety briefing, and then we'll head off down the river. So guys, on the left-hand side there, as we make our way out of the boat, you'll notice a little brick-built bridge. Wroxham Bridge there has been there ever since 1619, when the brick bridge was constructed. Before that, obviously, it was just a wooden bridge across the river here. And after 3 centuries of strengthening work, some of the original brickwork actually still remains. And you might be able to see that by the darker coloured blocks there. Just left one of the oldest boat yards in the entire Norfolk Broads, and that originally opened in 1878. A gentleman called John Lloyds opened the boat yard back then. A little bit later in 1935, a gentleman called Swans started the trips like this one round the river here. That was known as Broads Tours, and this still is called Broads Tours today. Now the Belle of the Broads, which is the boat trip we're running on, was actually built in 2004, right here in the boat yard we've just left. We've got 4 double-decker boats in our fleet. 2 of them are open to the boats, one of which you might see on the river this afternoon as it's got a private charter for a wedding party. As we travel along the river this afternoon, do keep your eyes out for plenty of the wildlife, some of which I might just pass straight by, because I may mention it later during the trip. And obviously I've only got 2 pairs of eyes up here in the wheelhouse, whereas today we've got nearly 70 of you on board, so that's 140 eyes, so you're probably going to see a lot more than me. Now some of the things to look out for are more rarer type animals on the Broads, and that are otters and the kingfishers, so do keep your eyes out for those. 5 of those wherries are looked after underneath these tarps, and that's looked after by the Wherry Yacht Charter Trust. Also, in this garden here, you might see a little set of railway tracks, and that's home of the Barton House Miniature Railway. That's a privately owned railway built by a gentleman who owns the land here. And he does open it one Sunday a month to the public. There's also some station houses and buildings that were taken from Holling East Station here in Walsham when it originally closed. So you might start to see the tracks and these tarp buildings on the right hand side now. So first of all you'll see a little white hulled wooden boat on the right hand side. That's one of the traditional pleasure wherries that were built back in the early 1900s. Now normally there's another boat under the green tarps where the little bridge is currently up in the air. Obviously that means the boat is out on the river, so hopefully we're going to have a spectacular sight of seeing one of these wherries actually sailing down the river this afternoon. They actually have to dig 30 metres or 90 feet into the ground to find hard enough land to insert concrete or steel piles, and then they build the houses on top of those piles. You'll also notice that a lot of the houses are actually built a few feet off of ground level. That's obviously due to flooding of the river here, so that the water can just run underneath the houses. Now we've got some wildlife coming up on the right hand side. We've got some grey-legged geese with their lovely little goslings here chomping away on the grass.
Very good, I like that.
And we've got a house coming up on the right hand side who doesn't care about having to build his house out of wood, because he's bought a huge piece of land, transported some soil in from elsewhere, and built a massive brick mansion on top of that hill, so he can have concrete footings like normal houses. This house is called Brynwood, also comes complete with 2 lovely private Broads in the front there, connected by the ornate bridges. There's also plenty of birds here on the right hand side, also mainly grey-legged geese there, but on the river just about to pass us, we've got an even cuter sight. So we've got some Canada geese with their very, very fresh little goslings. Still bright yellow, so they're literally just a couple of days old. Now, sorry to distract you from the beautiful goslings, but on the left-hand side here we have a lovely white and blue T20, so just over 100 years old now. And it was built originally as a purpose-built holiday let, and it still actually is a holiday let today. From one of the oldest to one of the newest houses coming up on the left hand side with a beautifully manicured lawn. Also he's got his boat out today, so you can see the lovely little day boat he's got there for pleasure use. Also the boat shed, boat dock, kitchen. So beautiful modern property. Lots of light coming through those expansive windows. Some of you may remember a light entertainer back in the day. Anybody remember Frank Sinatra? Yeah, he didn't live on the Broads. No, but George Formby did. Yeah, see? Just as famous, maybe. Anyway, coming up very shortly between some huge willow trees, you'll see a huge long garden on the right hand side, and at the end of it you'll see a lovely cream cottage with red tiles on the roof. Now, back in the day, that was George and his wife's Beryl's holiday home here in Norfolk, and when they owned the property, it was actually called Beryldean, named after his beloved wife. They also had 2 boats in their time living here. The first one was the Lady Beryl 1, and the second was the Lady Beryl 2. Now, the Lady Beryl 2 was again actually built from our boatyard there back in Wroxham. Now, when George owned the house,
Hundreds and hundreds of people used to flock onto the boats here to maybe catch a glimpse of George in the height of his fame. And maybe he was mowing the lawn, or maybe even cleaning some of them windows. So from the laughs, I assume quite a few of you do know who George Formby was. Not to be confused with you youngsters who think he did the boxing and the grills. Now they lived in year round. There's only a few that are actually available to rent. Now if you do want to buy one of these properties, you better have plenty of money, because you can't actually get a mortgage on any of the properties along the river here because of the threat of flooding. Now we only get about sort of 6 to 9 inches of rise and fall of tide here in Wroxham, but if that actually happens to coincide with a really huge heavy rainfall, it can actually be as much as 2 to 3 feet changing in tide. Obviously the gardens will completely flood, and that's why they actually build the houses just above the water level or ground level, because then it just runs underneath and the house inside is protected. Now, if you've got any football fans on board, this is my favourite house at the moment, because on the top of the flagpole, obviously they're celebrating VE Day, also the Union Jack, but at the very top, the best football team in the world, Liverpool FC! Yay! Now thatching is very popular here in Norfolk still, and coming up shortly there's going to be 3 properties, all with thatch roofs that are right on the right hand side. There are crescent beach and triangles in between. Where's the next cottage coming up now? Because now I did mention that we're leaving the 2 villages behind that there, because the river will actually split some 2 villages apart. What we saw on the right hand side is actually the village of Wroxham. Everything we saw on the left hand side is actually the village of Compton. So if you're across the bridge or having a before, leaving the boatyard and going over into the village where the shops comes up, is leaving Wroxham behind, and you're in Compton. It's the world famous Boys of Wroxham. It's actually in Wroxham as well. Now Boys was actually founded in 1896. Very shortly we're going to be leaving the main river view here and making a right turn onto our first call of the day. Now you may hear me make a sound signal to let other boat users know my intention of turning onto the starboard side. That's a very complex signal that's recognised all around the world. So let's see if any of you guys can make out what it is. Well, it's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. So 1 short blast of the horn means we're going to turn to the starboard or right. 2 short blasts mean we're going to turn to the port or the left. Now as we make our way through the entrance to Wroxham Road here, cast your eyes down either side of the boat, and you'll be able to see how clear the water is, because you'll see the bottom of it, and also how very shallow it is. And also you might see these sort of green cabbage-like type of plants at the bottom of the riverbed. And they're actually water lilies. Now the water lily actually is about 90% of the plant is underwater, and every now and then we think about these single ships. And if you look over to the far right hand side, just beyond those little tree snakes and stuff, might see two white white fronted birds just on the calm waters there at the background. Now they were just doing a little sort of love meeting, but they actually joined their necks together in the shape of a heart. So keep an eye out for that along the river here. These great crested greens might do it as you come by. Now this is the glorious boat here on the left hand side. Now this is called the Ardea. If you look at the very top of the mast, you might see a bird there. That bird is actually the grey heron, but in old sort of language it was actually called the Ardea, which is the name of the boat. Now these old trading wherries back in the day wouldn't have to have it on top like this one now. It would have been an open hop boat where they could have stored all their goods to transport them along the river system. Your eyes out for the many different types of bird on the Wroxham Broad here. Now I'm going to talk to you about why we have the Broads. So this particular Broad is a product called peat. Now peat's an organic material, but over time used to compact and form this thick layer of brown sludge. Now it was dug out in blocks called terns, left to dry for a time, go rock hard, a bit like a briquette, and it'd be very good for slow burning fires and cooking. So if the Vikings come over and dug all these pits out in the 9th century for their meat, well, we just left them round muddy holes. But in about the 15th century, digging up pretty much all was stopped by then. And that was because slowly but surely these peat diggings started to flood. Due to global warming, tidal surges and storms, the river started to back up and flow out to sea directly. So they flooded all the abandoned peat diggings that were left over by the Vikings. Now the peat diggings were eventually abandoned, not only just due to the flooding, but also because coal was then more readily available and was a lot cheaper and easier source to transport around the country. The Vikings sort of made the area. It came from the term broadinger, which basically meant a widening of the river. Nowadays, obviously, it's used and very popular for sailing. So we've got some sailing races on today, so I'll keep to the left-hand side here and keep out of their way for now. And over on the right-hand side there, you can see the sailing club. Now you can see all these numbers and sort of letters in different colours. That's actually the route of the race. So a predetermined route has been put up on the board there. And they would have got told each number and letter and colour, what that represented on the water. So you see all the buoys that are floating on the water with all the different flags on them. So that's actually the route of the race there. So say the white back of the white background. Now I'm going to try and navigate my way between some of these sailboats for you here without causing too much trouble to them. To get over to the Solace. So we saw the Ardea earlier, which was the lovely dark brown wooden boat. Now we're going to come up to the Solace, which is a black poled wooden boat. Now this one's far easier to tell which it is called. This has actually got big gold letters on top. So the Ardea had the bird, the Ardea or the great heron. This one's actually got the name Solace. And this boat there was actually built in 1903. And originally was intended to be a cargo or trading wherry. But halfway through its build, cargo wherries were in decline. So they realised that they didn't need any more of them. So what they actually did is added this deck on top, or the cabin. It's got luxurious bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchens and all that sort of stuff. And it was actually one of the very first pleasure wherries that were converted. Now at the top, they were actually used for navigation. So at night time back then, didn't have any lights in the 1900s. So they actually used that to be able to reflect off the water at night so another boat could see it coming in the other direction. Over the rest of the winter and early spring, and in mid-spring it's actually used for thatching. And there was also a grey heron in the green bed there on the margins. Hopefully some of you saw that. not just 4 types of tree. The most common is the alder tree, and if you look closely you can see some trees with round, dark, spherical leaves. And also you might still see some little brown cones attached to the tree. Now the alder is quite unique because it's the only deciduous tree in the whole of the UK that has cones, and by deciduous we mean a tree that loses its leaves during autumn. Now we also have different types of willow tree, sycamore and birch. Now the alder and willow trees are highly resistant to rotting. They can withstand very, very wet conditions indeed, so much so that obviously next to the riverside here you can see that most of the roots are actually completely submerged in the water. So good and resistant to rotting. Actually, before concrete and steel, I mentioned to you that the houses back in the village were built on concrete and steel piles. I've never seen one. So they're a small looking bird, about the size of a robin. So how are we going to spot one of those in this wilderness? Well, the good news is, they do appear to be bright electric blue in colour. So if I shout kingfisher left or kingfisher right, I see it coming towards us, it's going to fly past either the left or right side of the boat. And you've got to be quick though, because they can fly up to 25 miles per hour. And it's designed so that it's very silent. So when a kingfisher dives into the water, the shape of the beak, because it's long and it's got a sort of curved cone shape to the front, actually doesn't make a single sound. So it doesn't alert the fish that the kingfisher is there. It's so good at deadening sound that it was actually used by the Japanese. Now you've obviously heard that they've got them super fast bullet trains in Japan that go many, many hundreds of miles per hour. He's silent and be blanketed across there in lily pads and you can't actually see the water. And the native lilies here in Norfolk are yellow and white. Now the white lily is actually the largest native water flower in the whole of the UK. And back in the Victorian times, farmers would actually rent rowing boats to young teenage men who were looking to impress their girlfriends back in the day. So they rent the rowing boats and row amongst these beautiful white and yellow flowers. For romantic times, unlike today, the teenagers just take their girlfriends to Nando's. Now the river that we're travelling along, and we will travel along for the duration of our trip, is called the River Bure, as I've mentioned a few times. It actually flows for a further 25 miles downstream, out through past Great Yarmouth into an estuary called Breydon Water, and then eventually out to the sea. Now nowadays it's mainly used for leisure and recreation, but the Bure was at one time a commercial highway of the area. Now the sailing wherries would transport goods and wares up and down between Great Yarmouth and every village in between on the way to Walsham.
Seen any birds, have you?
Now at one point there were over 200 of these sailing wherries operating in Norfolk. But as always, progress, this time in the form of road and rail, eventually led to the demise of the river trade industry and thus the sailing wherry. Now hard digging back in the day obviously meant that the villagers would just take a few inches off the top and move along. But eventually on the grand scale in Wroxham the peat would have run out. As I mentioned earlier, it was built up over many years. And eventually they dug through the peat and got back to the wet marshy area that was always there. And that soil wasn't any good for fire cooking and heating. Now obviously our boat's too big to just moor up alongside AD there. But we do have some ice cream on board, strawberry chocolate and vanilla. It's all locally sourced from the stream from Norfolk here. So if you do fancy a tub later on, just pop down and see me. Now something on our left hand side, yay! Lots of viewing areas and marshes and all types of local flowers. The main thing that they've built out there is actually a floating platform. Now there's a hide with seating where you can actually look on this nesting platform, which has been built for common terns. Now the common tern is a bird that comes in from South Africa every year. And it comes in around now, April, May time, and starts to build its nest. It doesn't build nests in trees like most other birds out of twigs. It actually likes to bury its eggs in sand and gravel. So hence they've built these floating platforms full of sand and gravel so that they can lay their eggs and bring up their young. the spring and summer. They obviously start feeding them up, and when they get strong enough, they'll then fly back to South Africa in October, November time. So you might start to see some of these birds flying across the top of the trees. You may have seen some on Wroxham Broad earlier. And they're a bit like a white gull, only a little bit smaller, a bit more streamlined, and they dart around quite quickly. So if you see a gull that's sort of swooping around like it's slow, like a Volkswagen Beetle, these common terns are more like the Ferrari of the bird world, and they dart around like absolute lunatics. Now on the left-hand side, just as we make our way into the entrance here, you might see a dead tree. Just below the dead tree, right on the water's level, you can actually see loads of twigs piled up there. Well, that is actually an abandoned nest from a great crested grebe. I mentioned them very early on Wroxham Broad there. Hopefully we'll get to see a few close up here on Salhouse Broad. Now for whatever reason, obviously the sun is Broad is going to be extremely busy today. Hopefully I'll get you close enough to see. So now we're out onto Salhouse Broad here, our second broad of the day. Now this is very much a recreational broad due to its accessibility by road. It's actually accessible and they use car park about 10. And also on this broad you can rent canoes, kayaks, paddle boards, and there's also a little green hut you can see on top of the hill there. Now that's actually a nice little sort of lunch spot as well, so you can come grab some lunch whilst you're on the broad. And also it's very popular for the cruisers here that have got a holiday for a weekend or a week. It was absolutely packed in wartime. I heard Churchill say we'll fight them on the beaches. Well, people were too scared to go for a day out on the beach here in Norfolk during wartime. So the next best option was to come here to Salhouse Broad. There's actually aerial photographs to show about 2,000 people on this beach during wartime. And if you look closely to the very back of the bird, you might see the feet coming out of the water, because their legs are really far back on the bottom of their bums, and they hardly walk on land. That's why they build their nests pretty close to the edge of the river here. There's the Egyptian goose with its goslings, or two of them in there on the left-hand side. So a beautiful little bird there, but it's not from Egypt, it's from actually other parts of Africa. And it's not even a goose, because it's from the shell duck family. Now I've actually got a lovely nest here on the left-hand side. Now you can see the two grebes there are totally different. One's got an orange patch and one's got a black and white striped head. That's because it's already had that baby a month ago, and it's now turning into a greblet. Also you'll see there's rebuilding the nest because there is actually an egg or two on there. You can see the little white eggs in the middle of the nest. And you see they're diving down to the bottom of the broad here, getting twigs, leaves, anything like that, and rebuilding the nest. So he or she is very hard at work because they actually take it into... Oh, you can see the feet there as well. Did you see the feet flapping like a couple of paddles at the back? So they actually take turns in building the nest and sitting on the eggs and stuff. And when each one gets tired, they then just switch over. Now those little greblets, that's one's about sort of 4 or 5 weeks old now, and they do grow very, very quickly because when they're first born, they're literally only the size of the black and white striped head. Now they do grow very quickly because literally after about 12 weeks from when they hatch, the parents leave them on their own. Now when the very, very tiny little greblets are first born, can't actually swim, so they climb onto mum's back. A nice close-up view of water lilies here. Now the water lilies obviously tell us that it's shallow water, because they've only grown in very shallow, empty, healthy water. So at the moment that means our waterways here on the Norfolk Broads are one of the healthiest in the entire country. But that wasn't always the case. And even as recently as the 1970s and 1980s, the water quality very polluted. Cruising on the River here, becoming very popular. And at one time there was over 2,000 boats on the river, and they would all have bathrooms on because people wanted to stay on them. And of course those bathrooms and toilets just flushed straight into the river. Also any oil spills, and also farmers' chemicals from their runoff from their fields when they're over fertiliser and pesticide.